Hello, this video is going to be a breakdown video of a little, sort of scene setup that I created in this program called Polypop. So this program is essentially, for a comparison point, sort of a 3D version of Open Broadcasting System or software, which is a tool that lets streamers stream on the internet. So it's very similar to that program. This will let you stream over the web through various different services. The difference being with this program is it creates a interactive 3D environment where you can build and manipulate different objects, as well as stream your chosen content via the web. So this is a sort of a simple setup that I've created in order to basically imitate how I would play this mobile game. So what I'm going to do here in the beginning is just run you through a couple of the different features that I have here. This is the game scene here as I would normally start. And of course, the main purpose of this would be to play the game. Now, of course, as you can see on the screen, I have a couple different things set up that make this feel a little bit more interactive than you might normally think. So I have, of course, my hands set up here. So I actually have my hands that are controlled via a controller that I have that if I hit the button, it'll manipulate the fingers on the screen. So this shows me when I'm actually playing the game. So I have a couple different buttons here that are set up. I also have a button to go to the middle of the screen with my thumb there as well. Now, in addition to the finger controls on the screen here, I also have a couple other additional items set up as well. So some of the items that I have set up that actually let me add a couple different elements to my stream here set up is I actually have a button for first place win. So that brings a little trophy up with a bit of sound. I also have some crossbones for do not finish, so if I were to not finish a race in the game. And then I also have one more for boosting, so that would be if I'm boosting in the game. Now all of these can be controlled manually by me, or I actually have these set up to be triggered by commands in Twitch chat, or they could be set up for any sort of chat system that Polypop will accept. So I have them set up for Twitch, but you could easily do it for YouTube or maybe even some other services as well. It might just require some extra work on your end. So what I'm going to do here in the beginning here is just play one round of a game. We'll see, hopefully I win, but that's not really the point of this. It's really just to show off the capability of this, so maybe we'll get a couple fun things. Oh, and the other thing that I did forget to show as well is that in addition to those main scenes, I also have a scene for when ads show up. So this is a mobile game that's being played via Android emulator. And as such, there are of course ads that come up every so often unless you pay for the game in order to remove the ads. So while the game is being played, of course, ads will eventually come up, usually at the end of the match, not during the match themselves, but I also have a way to sort of cover those up really quickly. So in addition to having this screen here, or my main game scene here, I also have a hide ad scene, which just shows off the back of the phone here with some text that says good vibes only. So just a little way to sort of cover it up, and I believe this lasts for about 30 seconds is what I have it set up for, which is usually enough for me to get away from the ad and click skip. And then it comes back to the main scene here. So as I mentioned earlier, let's play a quick match here just to sort of show off sort of the gameplay itself. Alright, so this is my current favorite card that I'm using, the CCEV. So let's see how this goes. Alright, not a perfect start, but that's okay. That tank has some real speed on it. But we're gonna boost here. Hopefully this will bring us up into the front here. It does. Now the question is, can I hold on to this? I think we're gonna boost again. And that boost is when someone in chat could have triggered that. Or not the boost itself, but could have triggered an alert for the boost. And look at that, we got the best time. 1 point rather, so hopefully we can keep this up.
3, 2, 1,
The tank is so much acceleration, baffles the mind. Alright, we're gonna boost here. Hopefully we can keep up our speed. Alright, we're gonna boost here. There we go, personal best. Personal best, that was a good one.
new record.
Alright. Nice. Perfect. Great. It's a great example. So that's what happens when you can win, you get to place, and now I would either have someone in the chat trigger this, or of course I can trigger it myself. For the first place win there. And it looks like we got an ad break, so this gives me a good example to show the back of the phone here. Wait for the ad to time out. And then we'll switch back into the game. We'll continue on. So now that I've showed off a little bit of the gameplay, let me walk through my actual scenes here just to explain how things actually work. Alright, so the whole idea for creating this project was basically I found this racing game called Hill Climb Racing 2. I've been playing it a lot on my phone, and I just happened to come across Polypop again as a program of interest. I have seen it before when it was in an earlier beta form, but I didn't really have a real need or a real inclination for actually using it or creating anything with it. But it came around again, and I have been playing this game, and I thought it might be fun to sort of imitate how I play the game on my phone in sort of 3D environment sort of setup here. So this scene here is created with Polypop, as I mentioned earlier. The program is currently in beta, as you can see indicated on the bottom here. Alright, so this is my main scene that I have created here. So Polypop from the interface is very similar to a lot of other programs. If you're used to working with various sort of, I guess, creative applications, digital applications. It's a bit different than, I guess you could say, OBS directly, since OBS is more focused on just streaming and not necessarily on sort of, I guess, sort of designing and creating elements solely inside of its own environment. But, you know, for that part, you can sort of see where the different elements are laid out in Polypop. There's the library at the top left. There's the properties, that's also on the left side. And on the right side, you have your scene layout, and then below that, you have where the properties for the various elements that you can select in your scene are. And then, of course, in the middle, you have your main sort of, I guess, design, viewing, screening environment here. And then at the top here, you can also see that you have the different scenes that you can set up as well. That's sort of the core layout here. And then, of course, at the bottom here, you have your different elements for when you actually want to stream. Currently, I'm pushing my feed out through OBS directly via the VCam function, but you can stream directly from Polypop as well as just do a recording or go to a separate monitor. So you can see down here I have 2 and 3 because I have 2 additional monitors attached to my screen here. So I could also go to there as well. So I guess if you were doing maybe some sort of projection type of stuff, that might actually come in handy to have. But I'm just going to the virtual camera directly into OBS. Okay, awesome. So to start off here, I'll just sort of explain sort of the different elements that I have in my, I guess, main scene here. I only have 2 scenes that I'm set up for using in Polypop. I do have some other scenes and these scenes are just ones that I use for development more or less. So you can see here I have a whole bunch of additional elements in here that I use just for sort of placing things and figuring out how things might work. But most of everything is in here. So on the left side here, I have all the 3D models that I have in here, which are my hands, my trophy models, my skull, crossbones, this sort of bolt, 3D bolt, lightning bolts that I have here, as well as the main cell phone, of course. So those are the main elements that I have in here. There are some other elements that I have in here that are just sort of temporary items or sort of junk items that I haven't got rid of, but those are the main items that I have in here. Along with that, I have some audio, which you heard when I triggered the various different events, so such as crossbones, those are also triggered in here as well. Then I have the screen capture, so that's for my actual emulator application that I have here. So I have this Android emulator LD player that I use to actually play the game with. So that's what I'm actually using to play the game, and Polypop is able to capture that screen and bring it directly into the program here. And below the capture, I have all my different hotkeys set up here. So these are the different hotkeys that I use in order to trigger any of the different elements in the scene. So from the fingers moving on the screen to sort of the different sort of elements that I have here, and I'll turn off my music here just so that that doesn't keep becoming a bit annoying. All these are triggered by the various different hotkeys that I have set up here. One thing that I found that was really cool and interesting is that Polypop actually takes the hotkeys from your video game controllers directly. So you can see here that for the left thumb to actually move, I actually have my player one left trigger to actually trigger this. So of course there are, a couple different ways that you can get your keystrokes from your controller to register on your computer. But it's kind of handy that this program actually has a feature where that's not needed to use exclusively, at least. Now, I do actually use a program called Keysticks, so that's what I just launched up here. Now, I only use this for the button to trigger the ads or to trigger my hide scene here. Because of how I had it set up that I could just tap the button and then have it automatically stay on the scene and then tap it again for it to return back to my main scene. So because of that, I do use Keysticks in order to do a custom trigger event. But there's definitely ways that I could have worked around that if I really wanted to. So that's sort of the hotkeys here. Now, the sort of, I guess, strength of using hotkeys in general is that they allow you to trigger not just one thing individually, but they allow you to trigger a sequence of things as well. So, for example, the first place trophy here, I actually have this triggered with a number of different sequences in order to actually have it show up on the screen, do some spins, hold for a bit, and then return. So using Polypop's action sequence system, you're actually able to connect and link multiple different events together in order to do or play out any sort of, sequence of events that you really want to. And I sort of just used it on this sort of base level in terms of just getting things into the scene, moving them around, and then sort of sliding them back out. But there's a lot more that you can do with Polypop. You can do particles, you can do physics. There's a lot that you can do with this program, and I really only touched sort of the surface of it just for the sake of what I was trying to achieve in my project here. But you can see here that for this particular sequence, I have the sort of trophy move into position, I have it play a sound effect, I have it rotate, I have it wait for a couple seconds, and then I have it return back to its original position. And that's all just triggered by this right here, which I actually have this linked to my Stream Deck on my desk here. So that's how I'm actually triggering some of these events. But like I mentioned earlier, these events can also be triggered by your Twitch as well. So I actually have some Twitch chat alerts here so that when people in chat are submit specific commands, and I actually have these linked through stream elements. So this is what it reads, because when people put, for example, exclamation point boosted in chat, it actually triggers this line to be written in my chat, and then that will show into the screen here. And for this one example, it'll actually show the boost function. So that's how I have that implemented. You can see here that you can do it for stats, you can do it for alerts, you can do it for cheer alerts, you can do it for channel points. There's like a lot of customization here that you can do. And like I mentioned earlier, I have to set up for Twitch, but as you can see here, you also have the ability to do Twitter alerts and YouTube alerts. So there are other platforms that you can do this with, and I'm sure if you're creative or ingenious enough, you can probably set it up to work with other things, maybe such as like Facebook's live streaming as well. So that's sort of the setup here that I have for the triggers here. So again, just to reiterate, I am pushing this all out via my OBS system, although I could do it just from this program alone. But there were some other things that I wanted to do in OBS that Polypop couldn't quite do quite yet, and the main point of that one was really just sort of mixing my audio here. So that's sort of the left side and how I have things sort of implemented here, and you can see that the actual elements are dragged into the scene via this side panel on the right here. So this is where all of my elements actually live, my scene. So if I were to come over here to my 3D scene layer here, you can see that here, this is where I actually have all of my elements added to my scene, and I can come over here and modify them as I so choose. So you of course have the ability to move their transformations around, but you also have the ability to add mods to them as well. And these are just sort of special features or special effects that you can add that control the different sort of behaviors, like it says there, of your actual elements here. So you can see here for the first place trophy, I have a spin action and a return to origin action. There's a bunch of different mods that you can do here. For example, on the bolts, I have one that's a custom, it says camera shake, but it's more of an object shape. This is something that someone developed on the Polypop Discord that is really pretty active and has a lot of helpful people for helping you developing your scenes inside of Polypop. So it's definitely a place that's worth checking out if you're into using this program. So that's sort of the basis of the sort of scene, or I guess streaming setup that I have in here. Now, for getting these elements to work inside of Polypop, I had to do a couple different things in order to bring them in here. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to load up my Cinema 4D program. And sort of explain how I was able to bring these elements into Polypop. Depending on how you want to import your items, it's not necessarily a hard thing to do, but there are some, I guess, tricks and techniques that I learned that might help other people if they're planning to do something similar to this. So the first thing that I want to go over, and this is probably the one that took me the longest to figure out, is the actual phone itself. So importing objects into Polypop is relatively straightforward. They give you a number of different formats, and they also have some tutorials on their website as well as videos that you can use as reference. in order to add the elements into your scenes here. The thing that I wanted to do that made it, I guess, a little bit more unique, although not too much more unique, is of course I wanted to have my own sort of phone element in here, and I wanted to be able to add my own video source onto it. Which isn't too hard. They do actually explain a bit how to do it, and they have some additional resources that are linked on their Discord. But that was sort of the first step that I wanted to do. Now, what made it, I guess, a little bit extra hard is I wanted to have a specific look on my phone. So when you import your models, you have the option of doing like a FBX or 3DS or OBJ file. And OBJs seems to be one of the ones that they recommend the most for you to do because it's pretty straightforward. But I wanted to have more control over the look of my phone in my scene here. And because, at least as of now, the sort of lighting environment for your models inside the program is relatively simplified, at least right now, until they develop the tool a bit more. I wanted to, sort of have this sort of glossy look on it. And while playing around with the different sort of ways that you can import models, I noticed that 3DS usually gives you the best sort of shine in the program. Shine meaning sort of glossy sort of environment. Now the problem was that while doing that, I couldn't really get the sort of texture and look that I wanted. So that led me to figuring out that using the program that I like to use for doing 3D modeling, Cinema 4D, I was able to basically create an environment that I like, or a look that I like, and then bring that in to Polypop via baking my sort of materials onto my textures of my object. So let me open up my file here, sort of show you what I have. So this is the phone that I brought into Polypop. So this phone here actually has its materials baked onto them using sort of the baking method inside of Cinema 4D, or the material baking method. I'll also bring up some of the other files that I have here just so you can see sort of the development process that I had here. So you can see here that this is sort of the phone in its sort of entirety here. This is after I got this model, which I believe I got this model from Turbo Squid. But the main idea of this phone here is you actually sort of paint it using sort of the body paint tool inside of Cinema 4D to sort of get the look that you're going for. And then you use sort of the bake material object in order to bake your materials. And by doing that, you get materials such as these that has all this sort of color and shading from the environment that you have inside of the 3D program, and you're able to basically use those UVs to attach them to the object that when you import it into Polypop, it actually keeps sort of the reflections and the ambient occlusion and sort of the default speculars that you actually have without having to use sort of the native system side of Polypop. Now, of course, it would be ideal if you didn't have to do this because essentially these are all sort of pasted on and aren't perfectly accurate to your environment inside of Polypop. Although it does have like sort of an additive effect, so you can get additional reflections inside of Polypop. But this is sort of the way that I found sort of a way that for the time being. I'm sure eventually if the program keeps developing, it will have all of that sort of built into itself. But for now, this is sort of the way that I was able to go with it. So you can see here that this is actually the baked material for the color channel for the actual text that's on the back of the phone when it flips around. So using this sort of technique, I was able to sort of get the particular look or the exact look that I wanted for my model phone. So that's sort of the main process that I went for getting the phone into Polypop with the look and design that I wanted. I did sort of design the look for the phone ahead of time, just sort of based off of the sort of different pieces that it had. So I didn't start with the idea of painting it. I actually started with the idea of it just having these separate parts, and they were colored with their own individual materials. But since you can't, or it's not really easy to sort of import multiple parts with different colors and have the bank occlusions on them, or the baked occlusions on them, it's easier to sort of combine the main body of the phone into one exact item. So the only other thing to keep in mind when doing this is if you're bringing your own elements into Polypop, you do need to create a poly file. So this file basically just indicates that one of the textures is actually going to be an object texture so that you can actually add video sources or image sources or desktop sources onto the object itself. So that's the main thing to keep in mind when you're doing this sort of method, is that you do have to designate the right place, and you do need to have proper UVs in order for things to actually work correctly inside a Polypop, because that's the way that it knows sort of the dimensions of where to actually place things. So that was sort of the main, I guess, thing that I had to figure out for getting my phone, and I used that technique with a lot of the other different items. So the trophy is also using a similar method. The crossbones was actually had models and materials already set up for me, so that one I didn't have to do as much work myself with in terms of baking it. I can actually jump through and show those files off real quick. So for the trophy here, so this is sort of the end result of the trophy here. So you can see here again, I have the baked material tags on them. I have an environment in here. And if I render this real fast, you can see that this is sort of the default look that I had here. Now this one, depending on what I was going for, could have actually worked pretty well inside of Polypop with just some minor tweaking. But again, it wouldn't give me sort of the nice highlights that I have in here and sort of the ambient occlusion that I had in some of the shadowed areas. So that's why I decided to bake this one out as well. So if I look in here in this folder, you can see here that I have sort of the baked materials that are used to compose this shape. So again, those materials did a really good job of when you bring the items into Polypop, giving them the sort of nice detailing that they currently have. The crossbones is a model that I believe I got from Turbo Squid, and this one came with really nice textures, so I didn't have to do a lot of work on this one other than just to make sure that it imported correctly. So again, I used FBX for this import here. So the only other things that I have here are the hands. So the hands here, Polypop doesn't quite yet have the ability to import FBX animations or sort of skeletal systems or anything along those sort of lines yet. So the way that I got around that was by importing the hands and the thumbs separately. So if I look here, open up this file, you can see that this is sort of the hands and sort of the position that I wanted them to be. So these hands are fully posable. That is sort of how I got these files. So I'm able to actually pose them myself. So what I was actually able to do here is I'll open up the left hand here. You can see that the left hand here has the full hand but without the thumb. Then I also have a file here but it's just the thumb as well. So these are the two files that I exported into OBJ, and then inside of Polypop, I was able to position these in the right place so that when you hit the triggers on your controller, they actually move inside of the scene. And I will turn back on my controller here so that I can actually show this off. So there we go. So just like that, you can see that the controllers and the fingers move inside the scene. Now, of course, it would be cool if they could actually animate in the scene. That's something that I might try to do in another program just to see how far I can push this sort of concept. But I'm pretty happy with how it turned out, and because how I have it angled here, I believe it's pretty sort of believable with how it actually works. And again, these hand models, I believe these ones also came from Turbo Squid as well. So I didn't have to do a lot of modeling on this project myself. I think the trophy was the one that I modeled the most here, and that's just because of the specific look that I wanted to get for it. But most of these models were all found online for free. And of course, there are many places that you can get even higher quality models if you so choose as well. But I think for what I was going for, this turned out really well. So again, this is just sort of a quick little breakdown, or just quick breakdown of how I built this sort of mobile gaming streaming scene setup inside of Polypop.